The education system has problems. This is something we all know. It's talked about, but what are its specific problems and how can we specifically fix them is not something I see addressed comprehensively enough. So that's what I want to go over in this video. As someone in university, but also a recent high school graduate, I feel like I can speak on this pretty accurately, as I've seen the school system as it is right now. Additionally, for this video, I've talked to a bunch of other high school students to discuss their experiences and done as much research as I could. So, I've compiled 6 specific problems in primary and secondary education and solutions I propose that I guarantee would cause quick improvements. So, the format's going to be as such. First, I'm going to name the problem, tell you the grades it generally affects, and then I'm going to explain it, explain the solution, explain some counterpoints and why I don't think I'm incorrect, and let's go. So, first, failures in art type classes. So, tell me if this is a common occurrence for you. You're taking your school art class, and 1 week you're doing drawing, 1 week painting, 1 week something with beads, a little random art theory each time. This type of rotating carousel of random activities is commonplace in these arts-oriented classes. If you've taken dance, art, or music really any time in your primary through middle education, you'll probably have seen this. Essentially, the big problem with these classes is that you never really develop any skills, because you never stay on any specific art topic nearly long enough to develop any sort of proficiency in it. It's clearly, and unfortunately so, more of an activity designed to fill school time rather than an actual class designed to teach you things. They're being treated in a different way compared to their science, math, English counterparts. And this is a big problem that continues much later than you'd expect. Its peak is in early grades. But me and most of the people I've talked to were continuing courses like this as late as 8th or 9th grade. The theory behind this is that a rotation of concepts like this presents constant new ideas for kids to potentially revisit on their own at another point. But this has 2 problems. One, it just continues way too long. At a certain point, school is for learning skills, and continuing this so late means that art classes will be viewed by students more and more as a waste of time through the years. And the second problem is even in early years, it's nice in theory to visit a whole bunch of different ideas that the student can revisit later on their own based on what they like and what they didn't. But the problem is, it almost never results in students actually going to do these on their own time in the future. Only a small portion of students actually go on to pursue these goals in their own time. For the vast majority, these classes were essentially a waste of time. That being said, the one exception is in the very early grades. I'm referring to things like kindergarten, grade 1, where school is not so much about learning specific skills as it is learning to operate as a human being, learning physical dexterity, things like that, where in the early grades it really does make sense to do a rotating carousel of activities, not really pursuing any to a great extent. But that's the only exception. And so the structuring of these classes ends up making them a huge waste of time. But luckily, this one has a really easy solution. Longer periods of time and focus spent on specific subjects within the course, developing tangible skills a student can see progress in. So instead of drawing, painting, etc., each for just a few days, the course should spend a few weeks on one specific skill, such as, let's say, painting, and actually bring all the students up to a real level of expertise in that particular skill before moving on. Ending the year having gone through far fewer subjects, yes, perhaps only 2 or 3, but achieving some level of real proficiency in each skill. Students will go home and really be able to paint to some level of skill or be able to draw to some level of skill instead of just having tried drawing for a few days once. Now, another common problem is failure in a clear progression, both through the course and between years, but particularly within one specific course. Now, this is especially prevalent in early years, but does continue all the way up to grade 12. So, students will spend time on one particular unit, And over the course of that class, they'll develop an understanding of that section. But then they'll come to the unit test and move on to the next unit, which is sometimes not really related to the previous unit, and they'll essentially not revisit that topic again. In the early years, that topic will really never be revisited. And in later years, it's still basically never revisited. It only briefly becomes relevant again on the final exam. But during the course of your regular classes, you'll learn things that will never become relevant again later in that class. And this is especially detrimental for students struggling, since they'll often not come to a complete understanding of one unit before moving on to the next and throwing all the progress they've made away. This is a more difficult than the previous, but certainly implementable solution. A simple change in the curriculum with the intent of ensuring that each unit builds on and uses information from the previous. Now, if that's not clear, I'll give an example. In my pre-university schooling, in science class, we would do ecology units and cell units. And aside from the fact that all organisms were made up of cells, we were never really given any intermixing between the two units. In fact, we would have the ecology unit first, followed by the cell biology units. To improve this, you could start with the cell biology units, explaining their interactions with each other in an organism, then move on to how they relate to evolution of larger multicellular organisms, to sort of relate the two. That's just one example. Now, this isn't a total failure of the education system. There is theory behind what's going on here. So the theory behind the technique that is in schools right now is called spiraling. Now, the idea of spiraling is that you introduce a concept in a simple way. In some early grade, you probably learned about fractions using the classic slice of pizza example. And each year, you would come back to fractions with a progressively more complex framing. This is actually a good idea, but because school boards are making the curriculum for many years at once, they may be overlooking single-year progression and viewing it from an angle that's actually too encompassing, that being many, many years at a time. Because see, let's say a student did not really get the fractions concept in the first year. Since they won't revisit it until the next, they may lose the little bit of understanding they developed and basically be going into fractions brand new. And now, he has to try and learn fractions in a more complex framing than he did in the first year. And you can see how that can get out of control over the years, with each year them not really understanding a concept and it being forced into a more and more complex scenario. This is why classes need a clear progression, where they learn a topic that stays relevant for the entire rest of the course, so they have the entire rest of the course to develop a that grade understanding of the concept. This makes it so a course isn't just a checklist of units, but instead a picture, where each new addition reveals a part of a larger whole. Another big issue, and really a missed opportunity, is the poor implementation of technology. In almost all of grade school, computers were almost always used in one of two use cases. One, as a direct paper replacement, so used for filling in worksheets, taking notes, turning in written assignments. Essentially, using them in the exact same way you would a regular piece of paper. And the second is for one-off class activities. Occasionally, especially in science class, but in other classes as well, we would use them for one-off activities, using interactive websites to do experiments or learn one concept. These two uses are both fine. The problem is that they fail to take advantage of the benefit that can be gained from use of this technology, since in most cases, they're only being used to perform tasks that could be done on paper. The new benefits you get from computers are underused. The solution here is simply to take advantage of the new capabilities. I'll jump right into a real-world example. A great piece of software I learned about and used for only one of my university classes was called Codon. In it, you would read the course material, do review, study, and do practice questions all in one place. And this same sort of software could be implemented into every school, and this would help in a variety of ways, given that it would keep all of the study material in one place and remove the confusion of studying, as students would know exactly what to do at all times if they wanted to work on their courses. They would simply navigate to the school website, read the material, and do the readily provided practice questions. This saves time, as students often spend a lot of time studying poorly, trying to figure out how to properly learn the material. This removes that step, allowing students to get straight to learning. This is one where budget would be a real constraint, and that's really a limiting factor on teachers, because even if they want to use this technology well, they can't. But the addition would be so immediately beneficial that it would outweigh the cost and certainly be a good use of school funds. So, one of the most important issues is failure in early grade basics. And this one is readily talked about, so I won't go into it too long. But if students have weak fundamental skills like reading comprehension, basic math, and critical thinking, then every lesson they do will simply be harder to comprehend and harder to implement for them. And the problem is, if you're a student and you don't develop these fundamental skills at the grade in which you're required to by the curriculum, then they really aren't ever revisited at a basic level. And while students who are serious problem cases do get extra help, ones that are simply below average in their fundamental skills, without being so poor that it's immediately visible to everyone, they basically will never have those skills revisited. The solution here is simply to continue doing psychometric testing for reading, math, and critical thinking into later grades of school. Students falling behind in any year can be given extra tutoring in these critical areas to bring them up to snuff, allowing them to do better in their regular classes. Now, to be clear, this is not to create another standardized test. Checks for these sort of skills should be given if a student is suspected of being weak in one fundamental area or another, so the teacher can help them. This means extra focus needs to be given to each individual student by the teachers and counselors. The reason you don't want another standardized EQAO type thing is that it would bombard teachers with information about students, many of whom aren't struggling in any of these areas, and therefore would give extra work to both students and teachers for no reason, actually making it harder for teachers to identify the students who are struggling because they might be drowned out in the noise. Now, another difficulty with grade school is the lack of specific work for students at different aptitude levels in different courses. Because classes are paced based on the average capabilities of students in that class. The downside of that is twofold. For students who are above average, the pace is too slow. Therefore, they are not pressed to develop proper habits in terms of studying and practicing, because they're able to achieve good marks in the course without that sort of work. This will hurt them in the long term, as classes become harder and harder. And therefore, if they do not develop these habits of studying and practicing early in their school career, they will eventually reach a class hard enough, in high school or university, to stump their natural talent. And they will have a very hard time making up all that missed studying practice. And for students who are below average, the pace is too fast. They're shown that even if they study hard, they will not be able to adequately work and achieve their goals in that class. Therefore, they'll become disillusioned with coursework and will not work as hard in the future, further depressing their progress through school and creating a negative cycle. There are two solutions for this, and depending on the capabilities of the school, you would do one or the other. The better solution is to simply have multiple courses of the same class, so an advanced, average, and slow-paced version of the same course. Now, the goal in the end would be to have both cover the same amount of content, but you don't want to punish the advanced students by slowing them down. So the average and below average versions of the course would simply have to take longer hours, stay at school longer, and take less electives, essentially spending more hours in the same course. To fill the time of the advanced students, just take less time per course and allow them to do even more work and expand their skills by taking advanced electives. Now, the problem here is that you have a big staff burden. You're splitting what was once one class into three, tripling the amount of people you need working, which for many schools might simply not be possible. And another argument against this sort of thing is that it will leave certain kids behind, and becoming a self-fulfilling prophecy of sorts, where students who are below average once get stuck in that position, as teachers discount them, and they might give up on their own potential in a sense and stop trying, since they're able to detect that teachers no longer believe in their education. However, this is preventable with strict controls. First, making sure that movement between the slow, medium, and fast class is strictly defined by proficiency in the subject. So once a student reaches a certain aptitude level at a slower-paced class, they move up to the next one. This prevents teacher bias, parent lobbying, and any other factor making it unfair.
This also gives students in the slower classes clear goals, both promoting hard work and ensuring they don't feel trapped in a lower class, since the way to a faster-paced class is clear. You want to encourage mobility in between levels. Essentially, the goal is to give extra help to kids struggling, and at the same time, not to hold back the students who are high achieving, while still giving everyone the same quality education regardless of the pace of the class they're in. An alternative option, and this is what you do if a school doesn't have enough resources, is to simply have extra help for kids who need it, and possibly to mandate it for students below a certain grade level. Now, this is good, but it doesn't solve as many problems as the previous one solves. See, the main issue of this one is how you handle the above-average students. Either you pace the course fastest to accommodate them, but then you end up having the majority of the class with capabilities below the pace of the course, and therefore the majority of the class participating in what was intended to be extra help. The other option is to keep the pace of the class normal, and the extra help stays for students below average. But then you don't really solve the issue of the advanced students. You don't help them progress in any way, and essentially ignore them. This will cause the developmental problems we mentioned earlier. This is again one problem that tons of people talk about, but I feel like it's still important to mention. The problem is that schools often do not offer classes relating to important life skills like cooking, home finance, and practical mechanics. And of course, this one is a solution in itself. Simply implement these courses. This is already done in many schools, and every person I've talked to who did have access to these courses praises them. So therefore, this is something that could and should be done and implemented into more schools at greater numbers. There's really no argument against this one that I've seen. This is just limited by the bodies forming curriculum and the budget. So, there we go. If the problems of failures in art class, proper progression, technology implementation, early grade basics, student sorting, and proper life skills were fixed, the education system would definitely be better than now. Is that every problem we have today? The answer is almost certainly no. But if these 6 problems were addressed and fixed, I think a huge amount of students would drastically improve their knowledge and come out of the education system better educated and more prepared for the world. Anyway, what do you think? Leave a comment if you have any ideas yourself, or if you think I'm wrong in some regard. I'll almost certainly respond. Also, I'm working on an educational series right here on YouTube. It's designed to teach you evolution from any level of understanding up to a university level of understanding, covering evolution on the cellular, organism, and ecosystem level. If that's something you want to learn about, I'll leave a link in the description and in the comments. Also, if you love my Battlefront gameplay, there's nowhere else you can find that. That's only in this video, and possibly future ones.